All righty.
Welcome everybody. Let's call to order the August 3rd meeting of the North Gateway Redevelopment Advisory Board. Start with a roll call, Linda, please.
Okay. Jared Martin,
Here.
Mark Adams. No. Nate Levin. He was here.
Did we lose Nate?
Looks like maybe we did. Oh, here's Mike Alley. Okay, excuse me. Scott Cantonwine.
Here.
Thank you. Deacon Lucas, excuse me.
Here.
Thank you. And Mike White.
Here.
Thank you. Oh, Nate's being readmitted right now. Okay.
Nate, are you there?
I am now. Sorry.
You want to? No problem. So Nate showed that Nate's here. So we do have a quorum. I motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in
Second.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay.
Aye.
Agenda approved. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the April meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Second by Mike Alley. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
Approval of minutes passed. I don't believe we have any public comment today. So let's move on to 5A. Gretchen Bennett's here to talk to us a little bit more about the homeless problem going on. I'll just give it over to you, Gretchen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, everybody. And what I have are some updates on some changes that we made to the city's Salem Revised Code that relate to managing our public spaces. And I'm happy to answer any other type of question that you may have as time permits. So you might know that there was a bit of a legal landscape for the city to catch up to. We had a couple of decisions at the Ninth Circuit Court of the Federal Circuit Court system, and then we had some legislation passed during the 2001 Oregon legislative session that really provided some direction and clarification on what cities can legally do and not do as it relates to the managing the impacts of people experiencing homelessness and living unsheltered in public spaces like sidewalks or parks or just other stretches of public property, maybe like landscaping strips. So we took a good, careful look at the code and the council repealed items that we felt were out of compliance and could have subjected the city to costly lawsuit. And we also put in place some restrictions to camping on public property that we thought would be legal given the requirements. And so to summarize though, and that all went into effect on June 22nd. So it's still fairly new for us. It also essentially reflects what we'd already been essentially sort of steering towards or working on. So it may not feel like much of a change for you. It really just kind of brought our code into compliance. It included an overall repeal of some very old language that was in there that we just knew was out of date. And it included a repeal of something known as the Sidewalk Conduct Ordinance, which had sought to regulate the actions of sitting or lying down for extended periods of time on sidewalks. That actually had never gone into effect because although council had passed it, it was passed with conditions that needed to be met before it was implemented, and those conditions had never been determined of having been met. So that was also in the event really not much of a change because we weren't implementing that. Instead, we clarified restrictions and rules. Like we reaffirmed that you can't camp in any of the parks. So parks are not a place. We recognize that you can't camp near vision clearance areas and building entrances and exits due to some safety concerns. We said you can't camp with around and surrounding the perimeters of existing shelters or day center spaces. And we clarified that there needs to be a pedestrian path large enough for passage for people with varying disabilities. So at least a 36-inch path of travel on sidewalks for folks to try to balance that important need also for travel. And then we also clarified you can't camp in residential zones. And lastly, we did put into place an extra tool where we said that the city manager may from time to time recognize an area for no camping due to any sort of significant health or safety or chronic impact space when we just believe that this needs to be disrupted and ended for a period of time. We've got an extra tool that we can use on occasion. So wanted to bring all of that to your attention and invite any kind of discussion or questions about how that might impact your renewal area. And if that's all right with the chair and staff, I can also take questions on other aspects of homelessness if you like.
So has the city manager started looking into some of these areas that are really bad?
Oh, on a daily basis. He's super aware of locations that are very difficult, and we're actually triaging daily where to go, how to utilize the people that we have, and concluding camping at different locations. We work in a number of spaces on a regular basis. Yeah, always happy to hear reports of locations that might be of concern. I'm thinking about one in your gateway area. We've been spending some time on the area. It's adjacent to property that Catholic Community Services owns up at approximately 3737 Portland Road Northeast. And then if you go past their property, there's an open area that you know, it's kind of sloped, and then it's open grass, and there's a railroad track running through there. We've been working up in that space quite a bit, for example, this week and last week.
We have a property, this is Scott Cantwine. We have a property within the renewal area that is somewhat near where Gretchen's describing. That's a little bit further south. But we have had numerous, ongoing unabated issues with camping. We've interfaced with the homeless outreach team. We've reported the incidents probably no fewer than 10 times. Just constant camping, dumping, fire setting, which culminated this weekend in about a 4-acre grass fire, which required 5 Salem Fire Department apparatus. Nearly burned down our $10 million building. And so I think yes, this is just one example, but our concern is the increasing severity of behavior and the seeming inability or unwillingness to do anything about it. Because regardless of the statutes and the ordinances and the policymaking regarding houselessness, arson is still a felony in Oregon.
Yeah, that must have been terrifying and maddening to have.
Those are 2 words, but also I think an important word to add to the mix is entirely preventable.
Well, always happy to unpack that, Scott. There was a lot there in what you just said. I was encouraged yesterday to learn of a new tool that we haven't had. There's a grant that's been received and efforts underway to build a secure residential treatment facility for people who are legally compelled into some longer-term mental health services. The Salem hasn't had a facility like that before, and I was delighted to learn of the progress towards having that. That'll be 16 beds that I think will come in into great use as one example of a much larger needed system.
Do you guys have any records of actual people being charged with crimes in any of these instances? Like, I know, like my property, I have a wooded area, and it's once every 2-3 months, you guys are coming in with dump trucks and taking 40 people out of there. And I always say, I will charge them with trespassing, but I never get contacted. Do you guys actually pursue any kind of charges when these people are breaking the law?
Well, that's interesting. We do. There are examples. I was aware of a situation where a person was arrested just a couple of weeks ago. Several examples are coming into my mind. I can't speak to your situation or any sort of overall statistics. We have an overall understanding that charging a person for trespass sometimes has a limited effect. It's not a lodgeable offense in the jail, and we don't see that the fines motivate behavior except in rare circumstances. So there are some challenges to expecting that pathway to make an impact on some of the folks' behavior, but it depends on the person and depends on the situation.
So is there a way to make that trespassing where you put them in jail overnight? So there's some kind of recourse?
Yeah,
Because
that's
obviously the fines don't work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That they're not going to pay the fines,
Yeah.
but they need to have some kind of repercussions for their actions. Something has to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, we've struggled with a lack of accountability and a lack of tools to be able to use that can influence or change a person's behavior. The decisions about what's lodgeable are made over by the different jails. The folks that manage the jails make those decisions. And the city had been in regular discussion about which offenses are lodgeable. It comes down to resources, and they're lodging the most dangerous situations, and so it gets triaged is what happens due to funding.
We built them a pretty jail down there.
Yeah,
Pretty big.
yeah.
And
I don't think all the pods are
I
open,
don't
if
know.
I'm not mistaken.
So I was in a meeting with Councilwoman Linda, sorry, I don't recall her last name, 2 weeks ago, along with the police chief, and there was 5 other people there that were mainly property owners in the 19th Street, Vista, 22nd Street area south of McGillcrest, as it had the conversation was regarding vandalism, outright theft, breaking, entering, burglary, etc. And the conversation had to do with not responding or arresting folks that were on camera for doing stuff, and the general consensus by the police was they didn't have the capacity in the jails or the ability or the manpower to do anything about it, and or to effectively make a change where you started locking up some of these guys, which is a step well past the homeless encampment. So I would say politely that there isn't anything that's going to happen until the laws change with the city of Salem, where they don't allow, permit, or encourage homeless occupancy anywhere for any reason. There's a friend of mine was back in Charlotte a couple months ago on a business convention meetings, etc. And he said after work he would go walk the downtown area, and it was clean and didn't have a homeless presence, and the buildings, businesses were in good condition, didn't have broken windows, didn't have vandalism, etc. And the bottom line for us is that as long as it's allowed and permitted, it'll be present. And the reason why Oregon, Washington, California have the highest homeless population percentage-wise of any places in the US is that we allow it.
Nate, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's one note I would make, it's important to note that decisions at that level are at the state and Ninth Circuit level. The city of Salem, it wouldn't be lawful for us to make a decision, for example, that just eliminates camping. We've got guidelines that the legislature and the courts have established for us that open us up to lawsuit. So it's a decision that's outside of the city's ability to make.
The city of Bend, which I believe is within the state of Oregon, has just issued or completed code changes that required campers to move every 24 hours, and they're finding a way to enforce it. So I want to be polite and civil, even though I don't feel that way because of all that's transpired on everything that we are involved in. But the city of Salem has absolutely not done what they have the ability to do, and they certainly haven't allocated resources. I think if you take a look at the cities of Portland and the losses to that community in businesses that are closing and moving out of the area because of the consequences of trying to have a person go into a business with a homeless presence on the sidewalks is not a positive resultant. It is not going to help the city of Salem and the people that are downtown, and it's sure as hell not going to help the tax rolls, because if any business person has a homeless presence and it is impacting their bottom line, they have a challengeable consequence to the value of their property because of that.
Yeah.
And I think when the city starts dealing with the loss of revenue because of the value of the businesses is going down, there is an outside possibility that one of the do-gooders will come to grips with the fact that they're losing ground.
Sure. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to watch how it works in Bend, and if the ordinance there and in some other communities ends up being workable for them and for the community. One of the standards that we're paying attention to is any restrictions need to be objectively reasonable, including from the standpoint of the person experiencing homelessness. And so it's interesting to play that forward, and also that there be options or locations for people that protect people from the elements. And so having, like in that example, being able to reasonably transfer to something that protects a person from the elements during the day would be an important pairing with a rule like that, for example, in order to remain legal. Yeah.
I think just to add on to what Nate, I think what Nate said was excellent. And I think Gretchen, we've had conversations related to our Broadway property. And I think just to maybe tack on to what Nate has said and maybe say it a little bit differently, I don't think the concern is as much the fact that people are homeless. That is certainly a bad thing for anybody to experience, and not, I don't think anybody on this call or in this community wishes that on anybody. I think the issue, and this is where I really think the city needs to unpack its thinking, is homelessness itself is not a crime.
Right.
I think everybody on this call, everybody in the community can get on board with that idea. I think where the frustration rightfully grows is the behaviors associated with that.
Right. Agreed.
Nobody here is upset that people are homeless.
Right.
People here, property owners in the city, elsewhere, are frustrated because the destructive behaviors, the rampant, unabated crime
Right.
Just as, if I were to go and set fire to my neighbor's property, which I'm not going to, but this is just hypothetical, I would be charged with arson.
Right.
If I'm homeless and set a fire that creates a similar outcome, I think people here are confused as to why homelessness has all of a sudden become an affirmative defense to at least a dozen felonies. And I don't think I think that's rightfully questioned.
I would actually challenge that. I don't think that's actually the case. I experience personally examples regularly of if crimes are committed, we follow the same pathway of how crimes are processed and charged and lodged for a person who's unsheltered as well as for a person who's housed. It just comes down to categories of crimes and what's provable and not provable. And of course, the capacity of the police to investigate all levels of crimes. I don't know that I'm saying that very well, but I haven't experienced, well, if somebody commits a significant theft or arson, that they get a pass because they're unsheltered. Certainly that's at least not my experience.
Okay. I think we can all respectfully agree to disagree and maybe hope and pray for improvements.
Yeah, I hear you.
I can tell you that the police department, in answer to Scott's hope that some crimes will be pursued, have said pretty candidly that they don't have detectives, that their detective staffing section is a shadow of its former self.
Correct. Despite our growth in population. And I know there's an important necessary focus on violent crime, which has been increasing.
Well, where they were as far as the number of detectives 10 years ago and where they are today, we've got an increase in population and a severe reduction in the number of detectives.
Right. That's correct.
Anyone else?
We're dealing with, I think, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We're dealing with, I think, one of the worst case scenarios right now up here in Portland for people where there was a building fire in a large abandoned Kmart building where houseless people got in there and set a fire. And that fire basically blew potential hazardous materials 1.5 miles throughout the city of Portland. DEQ, EPA, FEMA got involved, and we had to bring on 150 people to do a mass cleanup of that 1.5 miles, and we're still out here, and it's 2 weeks later, and it's looking like we're going to continue to stay out here. And it's looking like there's also going to be a large class action lawsuit for the building owner, and it's just turning into just an absolute disaster for the building owner. And at the end of the day, the building owner was trying to rehab the building so they can, have a distribution center, and the city of Portland wasn't able to give them their permits. They were holding, their permits hostage. And now, there's a arson by potential houseless people, and, hundreds of millions of dollars probably potentially in lawsuits and cleanup fees, and just an absolute disaster. Maybe contaminated food. I mean, who knows what's all really going to shake out in this scenario.
Terrible.
Anyone else have any questions for Gretchen or comments?
I just want to tell Gretchen, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I know she's been making the rounds, and I know you've been always willing to come to this board, and I know you're the same with the others, and you oftentimes become the front face of these different issues, which can't be easy. And you always do it with such kindness and grace. And so I just wanted to extend my own personal thanks for always coming, and just being available to any of us that have questions or concerns or issues, and being so willing to be a partner.
Sarah, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the time and the good conversation here today. I wonder before I go, I think 2640 Portland Road might be on your agenda next. And I've had a couple of questions from community members about those micro shelters that are on the driveway there. I wondered if that's a question that this group would have, if you'd like me to clarify that or not before I go. Well, maybe just real quick. Some folks have thought maybe those are shelters waiting to be used by people experiencing homelessness. And actually it's not the case. We had purchased some micro shelters and then experienced a series of maintenance issues and failures with them, so much so that I exercised our warranty, and the vendor was amazing and fully replaced the shelters per the warranty for us. So we've been able to put the new ones to use. The old ones were rightfully the vendors because they gave me a full replacement. The vendors turned around and donated those to Church at the Park for purposes of repackaging them as garden sheds and selling them as a fundraiser. So just in case that question was there, I wanted to clear that up before I go.
Thank you, Gretchen.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jared.
Sarah, on to you. 2640 Portland Road.
Yes, 2640 Portland Road. So I don't have a huge update, but I did want to kind of loop everybody in for those of us that have been on the board for a while. This is also the former Zamora site. We're just trying to call it something new, i.e. its address, since it hasn't been the Zamora site in a very, very long time. And, you know, this is the site that we've purchased and we've had since, well, we started working on purchasing it back in 2017. That's, you know, directly across from Center 50 Plus. And we had initially purchased it in case the Pine Street extension were to go through. I believe, you know, we've had a couple conversations since then where the likelihood of that extension is not so likely, just due to initial conversations with the rail, because we would have to modify the rail crossing and the costs associated that we're already hearing and the other asks. So we've sort of now transitioned into, well, what is next for this site? For a couple of reasons. One, we'd always wanted to do something with it. And secondly, you know, as Gretchen has mentioned, Arches does have a current lease on the property. Their current lease comes up in November. We are extending it until May of 2024 with the goal that by then we'll have an idea as to what the next life of the property is going to be. And so we'll know how much longer, you know, they'll be able to continue potentially leasing it or using it, or when we'll need to have, you know, all folks off the site for potential development. So where we are right now is, you know, when we, and a lot of you, I know we're still part of things, you know, back in that 2017, 2018 is when we did the Portland Road Action Plan. And, you know, part of that was doing sort of a full market analysis of the Portland Road corridor. At that point, the board knew that they only had so many dollars left. And how do they focus that money? Kind of a first step to when we went through the maximum indebtedness process in a lot of ways. And certain projects were identified, you know, and one of those was, you know, there was a lot of focus, especially at that point in time, around food hubs or commercial kitchens, or, you know, in general, a lot of feedback that there was a food desert in the area. And then we sort of did a follow-up study that was sort of the community food hub. And a lot of that just took the market analysis work. We talked to a lot of community members, and we sort of were looking at that information towards an interim use. We'd started talking with Merit, who was a local entrepreneur sort of provider at, you know, they were going to move into the site, do some coaching and mentoring. Maybe there would be, you know, an availability to do something else. It didn't pan out. COVID happened. We found a need, you know, a more social need for the site. But now we're to the point where it's not so much about the interim use, because we've had one. It's really what's the future of that site. We don't want to keep holding on to it when it's a development option to do something there. So our first step is really to kind of go back. We know, and I know we've all talked about this, the market has shifted, development has shifted, a lot has shifted in the last 5 years. And so I've already had some early conversations with our team at Eco Northwest. They are the folks who did the full market analysis of Portland Road several years back. And I'm working on a scope for them right now to have them sort of update it, very specific just to this site. There's obviously the information that came out of all the work that we did several years back. At the same time, we obviously have council and community goals towards affordable housing. There's the idea of the food desert, there's the location of the site. And so the first step is we're going to get some updated market analysis information for that site. And then from there, kind of start to look at what might make sense in terms of development. We're also kind of waiting to see a little bit how things go. For some of you who may be familiar with what's happening downtown, we have the Block 50 development site that's currently up for development proposals. And so we're going about that one kind of a different way, which is here's the site, here's some of the things that are a priority to the community, to the council, come to us with your ideas. And so we're kind of seeing how that plays out, because this site may be another good opportunity to go that method versus a very specific RFP, so that we can work with the market and work with the public or the private sector versus kind of directing the private sector, so that we can come up with something that's good for everybody. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we are making moves. The site isn't just sitting there. I know it's been something that everyone's been really interested in, and as soon as we get some initial information, I'll be bringing that back to the board and we'll be having conversations. But I didn't want to start any sort of market analysis without y'all knowing that we are going to be doing that, just to make sure our basis of what we think and what we're seeing, is it still the same? Has it shifted? That kind of a thing. So that's sort of where we're at on that right now.
Yeah, I know in the beginning we were going to do a food cart pod, and now
yes, as an interim use. Yeah.
You drive down Portland Road, there's a couple that have already popped up.
Yeah. And we've had some really great ideas, and so it'll just be curious to see, is this a potential project, or we can take a bunch of these really great ideas and incorporate it all into one project. I mean, that would be golden, right? And that's what we're trying to figure out. And, housing is huge. What type of housing, is this, are we looking at a mixed use development? We can't do single family homes on the site. You can't have anybody living on the main level because of its previous use and the DEQ restrictions. But we can have people that are living, level 2, 3 and above. So that would allow some options for mixed use. So, can we do something that's, food based on the main level, or grocer or market? Could we have some sort of condoized, business incubator type space on some of those lower levels? Could we have housing, above that would help support the area? We're not 100% sure, but we have a lot of great ideas. We've heard a lot of great things. And so this is just a way for us to figure out, where's the market right now? Because it has changed so much. We know there's a demand for housing, but what else? Is a lot of what we saw several years back still the same? Or have, because of some of the other things that have shifted over time, has that changed? And then, I guess one of the things that we've really never talked about, but it just seems like an obvious piece that I'm going to ask them to look at is, is senior housing, does that make sense for this location? I mean, we're right across the street from Center 50 Plus, so would there be something where, there's some type of senior housing component to it, because you kind of got a dedicated audience, perhaps? I don't know. But that's what we're going to start to learn, is just, hey, there's all these ideas. We've talked to so many developers, especially during COVID, with things that they'd love to see and do. And, what's feasible, especially with the site, the size, we're talking about 1.7 acres. What are our options, and kind of what makes the most sense, so that we can come up with something that really, everybody's excited about, potentially. So that's where we are. I think our goal would be to really have an idea as to the future, or at least the direction that we're going, by this spring, is kind of where internally we're hoping to be. I don't like to put, definitives on anything, because, we didn't think we were going to have a 2-year pandemic. So I'm always a little nervous now as what's going to hit us next, but assuming there's no natural disasters or, health emergencies, the goal would be to have an idea here in the spring.
Any questions, anyone?
And if anyone has any ideas or questions or thoughts, you can always reach out to me separately. This is not a quick process by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to keep everyone in the loop as we kind of start moving along on it.
And then the ODOT, Salem Industrial Drive crossing.
Yeah. So this is just a really quick one. I believe, I want to say maybe it was in the fall or I think it was in the fall. We had someone from Public Works come to let everyone know that ODOT was going to be making some rail improvements at Salem Industrial Drive. It was pretty much just an ODOT project, but the city was going to be helping. So it was going to be sort of work on the tracks, the kind of the main and the spur tracks into like a signalized crossing. And then there was going to be some paving and striping and some curb work that was going to be done. And all that was scheduled to be occurring this month. Like I think a lot of people have probably already heard, a lot of ODOT projects came in far more expensive than was expected, including this one. And so they've sort of had to reprioritize based on their funding. And so this one has been moved to next summer. It is scheduled for next summer, but it has gotten pushed a year. So it isn't one of our projects, but I did want to make everybody aware that that rail crossing improvement won't be happening until next summer is what we're hearing from ODOT as of now.
Okay. Anybody got anything else? Comments? Mike?
Hey, Jared. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, question on the advisory board meetings around the city. Are they all still remote? I guess this would be to Sarah, or if any of them move back to in person?
The majority of them are still remote. Mostly it's a matter of locations. So we have to be in a location that would provide Zoom access, that people could still remote in, that they could still stream them live. So there's only a handful of locations that we could do that. Our downtown advisory board has chosen to start meeting back in person, but they were always meeting in our urban development conference room where we have those capabilities. So that's the catch, is that we just have to have all that technology in order to have a meeting. The state changed their laws about it during COVID, that all public meetings have to have a virtual ability to participate.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're having that in our own organization, just that we need that ability to do both. We have hybrid workers. And I'm looking forward to an app that just hooks everything all up with a push of one button instead of 15. It's a bit of an adventure when we try to do a.
Linda can probably give you some great insight on that one. Linda is the go-to. Do you have any ideas, Linda?
I can just share that I've had several embarrassing sessions where things have not gone as hoped, and it is kind of stressful when that happens. So all I can say is try to find somebody who can help you, because in my case, it was just a couple little twerk, and it's better now. So that's my only piece of advice.
You're correct. I mean, if you have an IT champion in the meeting, if you're lucky, then it goes well. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it can be kind of
it can be not so well.
Be interesting and so forth. But yeah, I mean, the Zoom works fine for me. I don't know. I was in person for the payroll city tax meeting, and that didn't go so well. So I guess video is okay. So
yeah, it does seem like for the hybrid, all the ones that were in, and council is it works the same way, honestly, as just a meeting like this one, or even when we have our legislative meetings, the majority of us are in person, but they all seem to require at least 2 staff people. You've got whoever's kind of on point for the meeting, and they usually seem to have a second one who's doing the technology part of it, just because it's a lot. And usually there's somebody sort of on standby with IT in case something goes kaput. And even with, I know, council meetings, it's kind of the same thing. They always have a communications person that's assigned to be in person at council, an IT person that's assigned at council, but then they have another communications person that's actually assigned to be running the remote aspect of it. So it does take more staff to actually do the hybrid versus just straight virtual.
Right.
Unfortunately, which is what, we all struggled with when we was kind of like, this is how it has to be. It's like, okay, how do we make that work? And I think all organizations are sort of figuring that out. But yeah, even for our, when we do legislative committee, it's, I would say 99.9% in person. But we still have to run it just like this meeting. And so it still requires the same amount of staff people. So whether you're there or not, it's the same amount of work.
Got it.
I guess it makes
Okay.
100% virtual easier in some ways.
Yeah, thank you for the answer on that. Just another quick question on the Welcome to Salem entrance on Portland Road.
We are trying to get somebody to give us an update.
Gotcha.
It's sitting in permitting with ODOT is my understanding. Yeah. So I've been continuing to check in with Robert, who is our new head of parks. And they had a design that ODOT had given them initial feedback of like, yeah, we think this is good. And so he was waiting to kind of get their final, like, yes, we're good with this before he started sharing it. I had tried to get him when we were thinking of maybe having a June meeting. I had tried to get him to come then and he wasn't quite ready. I have it on my list. I'm going to check in with him again in early September and see if we can't get him in October. But I am continuing to push to get him to give us what that design is going to look like, even if it's not final.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that I've seen, just observed driving by, is that at least it's being kept clean. And talking about our earlier issue with, the homeless camping and so forth, that was a popular spot for a short bit, but for quite a while now, not only has the homeless moved to a different area, it's been kept clean and so forth. So that's been good, at least for the initial, we've talked about the main entryway from Interstate 5 to this area. It's at least keeping it clean is a improvement versus having not having a sign at all. So
yeah, and having people camping around there and everything like they were doing before. I do think it's made it onto sort of that priority list just because of the sign issue. So people are aware of it. And I think there's also been sort of this focus, especially on the entry areas into the city. I know whenever I drive in and I come in at different entrances all the time, I've definitely noticed that it seems like, they're trying, I mean, you can only control people to a certain extent, but that sign area has been considerably better, I think, than when everybody first brought it up.
Yeah, I agree. I think the entry areas have improved. I would certainly agree with that. Unfortunately, as we've heard, they're just moving into other areas that are not entry areas, and it still is a significant issue for business owners and residents as well in the area. So thank you.
And please know we can bring Gretchen back at any time. I mean, if y'all want to have a more in-depth conversation with somebody else, I mean, we can always put that request in, or if you have questions or concerns that you just want passed along, you're always welcome to send them to me, and I'm happy to be kind of an in-between as well. So please, don't feel like just these are the only opportunities to have those conversations with folks. I'm happy to try and assist and coordinate wherever I can, or bring people to the meeting too.
I appreciate it. Anybody got anything else? Are we going to have a September?
I have a couple things if people want to know.
Go ahead.
So Silverton and 17th Street, as you guys know, we have that project. We packaged it with the bond project, so it'll be bigger and better and, much more improvement than what we were hoping for initially. We do have a design contract underway. Survey work has begun. And so I'm hoping to have an update maybe at the October meeting. I'll touch base with folks. If not, maybe November, December, but I'm hoping to get some sort of an update out to everyone here soon, just on how it's going and some of the challenges and whatnot, and what we're looking at and where, the status of the project is. So the team's only been on board for about a month. So I want to give them a little bit of time, but that's, we are moving ahead, which is always, nice to be able to share with everybody. So there's that. And in your packet, I included the update on both of our grant programs, so you can see where the money has gone, what we have. On both of those, it does include the money that we just added in July. But I think what you'll see is, we're continuing to get some really great projects. Our safety and security grant, which we call the strategic grant, we've had 11 grants in, just less than a year and a half, which I think is fantastic. It seems now as properties are changing over, that's now when we're kind of getting the interest. But the money is still there. We've got just under 300,000 available. At 20,000 a pop. So that still gives us quite a few grants that we can give out with no match, as a reminder on that one. Our capital grants, so we've got about 2.4 million available. That's because we just added $1 million in July, and then reminding we didn't spend a lot during COVID, so we had quite a bit of rollover, but we've started going through it with some difficult sites, I would say. And so it's really nice to see there's some people taking on some of these challenging areas. So those are looking great. And then we still have our money that, is there specifically for affordable housing or development infrastructure. As we get closer to the budget season, we always have those conversations. Do we keep those buckets of money? Do we incorporate those into something else? Obviously, our capital grant program covers the affordable and the development infrastructure. We just kind of had those set asides in case we didn't have any grant funds available, since we did go through that period for a couple of years. So I just wanted to make sure, I try to get those to you, every 3 to 6 months. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. But that's kind of where we are in those programs. And then one other thing I wanted to let everybody know of is so the city has always had a state lobbyist that we work with to help push our legislative issues, whether it's policy, project funding, things like that. The city has engaged now with a federal lobbyist with so many different programs coming out at the DC level for us to maybe be able to participate in, whether it's funding, whether it's policy, things like that. And we've just started engaging with them. And so part of that process is coming up with potential projects where we just don't see that we would have funding for. And, we have those immediate ones, and then the ones we're just going to keep an eye on. And as information surfaces, we may look at applying for grants or if something comes available. And one of the ones that we do have on the list is the Salem Industrial Drive improvements. Those are quite expensive, very difficult. And so I just wanted to let you all know that, when we're putting that together, and I do sit on that committee, I make sure that I think of, what do we need in North Gateway? What do we need in, McGillcrest? What do we need in all our urban renewal areas that we may not be able to do on our own? And that was one that during the maximum indebtedness process, we knew we could only give a few million at most towards it. And so that is on our list. And so I just wanted to let everybody know that, part of what I try to do is represent what all of our urban renewal areas might need, and that I am, representing North Gateway in that process as well. So that was just something I wanted to make sure I shared, just because there's lots of other things that happen just besides of kind of what we're doing here to try and push kind of our projects and our priorities for the community. So that's happening right now. And if we don't have any action items, September, we'll try to cancel, right, Jared? It always correlates with the Labor Day holiday, which is always a little tricky for folks. At this point, we don't have any action, but if something changes, we'll definitely let everybody know, and we will get the notice out in advance for cancellation as always. That's everything I have now, I promise.
Okay. Well, thanks. That's exciting. You're trying to get some federal money. I would love that Salem Industrial Drive one to go.
Yeah, it's not on the priority because we have to do design and a lot of other stuff, but you never know. And so we just try to keep it out in front, and our lobbyists now have lists of like all these different projects. And so that's part of what their job is, to help us see if there's some alignments or some things in the future to try and work through those so that we don't forget about stuff. So we're trying to kind of put everything, front forward. I think we have about 4 pages of like projects and policy items that we want to make sure that we don't lose track of, because there could be something there in the future.
Well, if there's nothing else, I will adjourn, and we will see you guys in a couple months.